Imagine a planet full of creatures we will never see again. Their traces in stone, dust, and the mysteries they left behind. Some lived millions of years ago, others disappeared just centuries ago. Some were majestic giants, others strange beings, as if they stepped out of the pages of fantasy books. We can only guess how they moved, hunted, hid, and breathed. This iceberg isn't just a list of extinct animals, it's a dive into the world of those whose time has passed. Into the depths where forgotten predators, unrecognized titans, and living mysteries dwell, leaving behind more questions than answers. The deeper we go, the stranger, more ancient, and more disturbing it becomes. Welcome to the Extinct Animals Iceberg. Level 1. The sky, the dodo bird, also known as the dodo, is one of the most famous symbols of human negligence toward nature. A unique species that existed only on the island of Mauritius was completely destroyed in less than 100 years after the arrival of the first Europeans. Mauritius is a true paradise. Warm seas, year-round sunshine, juicy fruits, and not a single predator. It was in such conditions that the dodo lived a large flightless bird with powerful legs and a hooked beak. It wasn't afraid of humans because it simply didn't know what danger was, and this became its death sentence. When the Portuguese first arrived in Mauritius in the 15th century, they encountered these strange birds. Exhausted by the long voyage, the sailors didn't think twice. Dodos were caught and eaten. Although the taste of their meat turned out to be extremely unpleasant, the bird was nicknamed nauseating. Later others came. They appreciated how easy it was to catch a dodo. It was slow-witted, couldn't fly, and you simply had to corner it. The Dutch called the bird lazy or fat-arsed, or possibly just stupid. The colonists themselves destroyed many birds, but the livestock and domestic animals they brought caused much more harm. Dogs and cats raided nests, sheep and cows destroyed plants vital to the local ecosystem, and trees were cut down, depriving dodos of breeding grounds. Several birds were attempted to be transported to Europe, but none survived the journey. The Chinese paddlefish, Zephyrus gladius, one of the most mysterious and tragic losses in the world of freshwater fauna. This was a giant predatory fish endemic to the Yangtze River. Its length could reach 3 meters, weighed up to 300 kg. There were rumors of specimens up to 7 meters long, weighing almost half a ton, but no proof was ever found. The paddlefish was easily recognized by its long rostral projection. It occupied up to a third of the body and was covered with sensitive receptors allowing it to detect prey. It hunted other fish and crustaceans, unlike the American paddlefish which filtered plankton. It had almost no scales, a long heterocircle tail, and small round eyes. This river giant preferred to stay solitary, gathering in schools only during spawning. Females reached sexual maturity around 10 years, and could produce up to 1 million eggs per season. The paddlefish probably lived up to 50 years. Its meat and roe were considered a delicacy, and were often presented as gifts to the imperial court. In the 20th century, fish were caught by the ton, and this was the beginning of the end. The turning point came in the mid-20th century. Dams began to be built on the Yangtze, blocking migration routes. Water became polluted. Paddlefish numbers plummeted. By the 1980s, the fish was almost never seen, and by the early 2000s, catches became sensational. The last reliably documented case was in 2003. A 3.5-meter female was caught and released back. Juveniles had not been observed since 1995. Attempts to save the species were made. Scientists set thousands of nets, hoping to find at least one paddlefish. There were plans for captive breeding and later for cloning, but everything hinged on the absence of living specimens. By 2020, it was officially confirmed the Chinese paddlefish was extinct. And not just extinct, gone forever. Not even tissues remained that could be used to restore the species. Megatherium, true giants from the past. Their name in Greek literally means giant beast, and it speaks for itself. These were prehistoric sloths. They lived in South and partly North America, from approximately 5 million to 12,000 years ago. They disappeared along with many other megafauna at the end of the last ice age. The main reason for their disappearance was most likely hunting by primitive humans. Slow, massive, completely unsuited to fighting armed humans, megatheriums became easy prey. People used throwing spears, allowing them to kill from a safe distance. Such giants simply had no chance. Megatherium was one of the largest terrestrial mammals of its time, up to 6 meters long and weighing up to 4 tons. It moved mainly on its hind legs, and a powerful tail served as a third support. At full height, it was taller than an elephant, an impressive sight. These creatures were herbivores. They used their huge front paws with claws up to 17 cm long to bend and lower tree branches toward themselves. But the structure of their musculature, especially the triceps, surprises scientists. It's similar to that of predators and allowed for fast, powerful strikes. Probably this was needed for defense. Although there's a hypothesis that megatheriums could have been partially omnivorous, their teeth suggest otherwise. They weren't designed for meat. Glyptodon, a true tank of the ancient world. Enormous, armored, resembling a giant armadillo. It roamed South America from the Pliocene to the very end of the Pleistocene, disappearing about 12,000 years ago. Its length reached 2 meters, weighed almost 400 kilograms, but despite its power, it still didn't escape human hands. Glyptodons belonged to the extinct group of herbivorous armadillos, the Glyptodontinae. Their body was covered by the strongest armor of fused bony plates, osteoderms. Similar armor protected the head and even the tail, but inside this mobile fortress hid a far from intelligent brain. Encephalization in Glyptodon was lower than in modern armadillos, and the brain itself occupied only a small part of the cranial cavity. The most famous species, Glyptodon clavipes, was first described by Richard Owen in 1839. But for a long time, scientists confused Glyptodon remains with megatheriums, giant ground sloths. Some even thought they were the same animal, just in armor. Only by the end of the 19th century did it become clear we're dealing with a completely separate branch of evolution, a formidable herbivorous armored beast. Glyptodon's shell consisted of hundreds of bony plates fused into an almost monolithic shell. This armor was not only strong but quite complex. Individual zones of the shell differed in shape, density, and ornamentation. Especially unique was its tail, covered with mobile rings of osteoderms tapering toward the end. Glyptodon's diet consisted of grass, shrubs, and low-growing vegetation. It had a wide, blunt nose, a typical adaptation for rough bulk feeding. It lived on the border of forests and open savannas, where there was plenty of vegetation, but one could spot an approaching predator in time. Speaking of predators, there were plenty: the saber-toothed tiger Smilodon, the giant bear Arctotherium, and others. Despite its armor, Glyptodon was not invulnerable. Native Americans arriving in the Americas quickly understood how to exploit its weaknesses, slowness, and limited neck mobility. There is evidence that people hunted Glyptodons and used their shells as shelter or even dwellings. Glyptodon became a victim of the so-called Great Megafaunal Extinction, a period when giant animals disappeared all over the planet. Most likely, humans played a key role in this. The thylacine, Thylacinus cynocephalus, or Tasmanian wolf, one of the most tragic disappearances in Australian history. It was the last representative of the Thylacinidae family and a unique predator that lived in Tasmania until the 1930s. Unique not only because it was a large marsupial predator, but because it looked like a wolf, though it wasn't one. Level 2. The tip of the iceberg Haast's eagle, Hieraitis morae, the largest of all known eagles that ever existed on Earth. It lived only on the South Island of New Zealand and was unique not just for its size. This is the only eagle in history that occupied the top of the food chain in its ecosystem. In the absence of terrestrial predators like lions or wolves, it was the eagle that became New Zealand's main hunter. Its prey included giant, flightless birds, most weighing over 200 kg. Haast's eagle would dive at tremendous speed, sinking its knife-length talons into the victim's back. It wasn't just a hunter, it was the undisputed master of the local forests and meadows. The eagle's habitat was dense forests, shrubs, and grassy plains along riverbanks. But with the arrival of humans, everything changed. By 400, most of the forests had been burned for settlement and agriculture. Moas were exterminated by hunting, and along with them disappeared Haast's eagle. Having lost its food and shelter, it couldn't survive. The golden toad, Incilius pyrigans, a symbol of disappearing amphibians, bright orange like a toy. It lived in only one place on the planet, the high-altitude cloud forests of Monteverde in Costa Rica, on a plot smaller than 4 square kilometers. Discovered in 1964, by 1989 it had disappeared forever. This was one of the most amazing creatures. Males sparkling orange like jewelry against the backdrop of wet forest, females black with patterns of yellow, green, and red lines. Every April, with the arrival of the first rains, they would mass emerge from burrows and head to puddles among tree roots for mating. Sometimes more than 100 pairs would gather at one tiny pool. Over several weeks, one female could lay up to 400 eggs, but only a few would survive. In 1987, American herpetologist Martha Crump observed golden toad mating. She called it one of the most stunning sights of her life. But 5 days later, the puddles dried up, eggs became covered with mold and rotted. Out of tens of thousands of eggs, only 29 tadpoles survived. And already in 1989, the last male was spotted, a loner whom no one ever saw again. In 2004, the species was officially declared extinct. The cause of death wasn't one, but several: climate change, an epidemic of the fungal infection chytridiomycosis, drought due to El Niño, and air pollution. Perhaps all this overlapped and became a deadly trap for the vulnerable species. Stellar sea cow, Hydrodamulus gigas, one of the most infamous animals to disappear due to human fault. This was an enormous, slow, and absolutely harmless creature, the last of its kind. It lived near the Commander Islands and became a real find for Russian seafarers in the 18th century. But just 27 years after its discovery, it disappeared forever. Previously, these animals' range was much wider from Alaska to Japan. But with the end of the Ice Age, and possibly with the arrival of primitive hunters, they remained only near the commanders. The sea cow, first described by Georg Steller in 1741, reached 8-9 meters in length and weighed up to 10 tons. Its skin was as thick as tree bark, and chewing pads keratinous plates instead of teeth allowed it to tear off and grind algae. They couldn't dive, only swam on the surface and spent almost all their time grazing in underwater meadows. They were sociable, cared for their young, and according to Steller's description, even tried to defend wounded relatives. But there was no escape from humans. The population that researchers encountered was already on the verge of extinction. Genetic analyses from 2021 showed the animals suffered from inbreeding. That is, even without human intervention, their fate was sealed. But instead of trying to preserve them, humans finished them off completely. In just a few decades, the last 2,000 individuals were exterminated. They were pierced with spears, cut with bayonets, and dragged ashore. The meat was salty, the fat had an almond flavor perfect for lamps. The only mention of their mass extermination, made by Peter Yakovlev, remained unanswered. When the sea cows disappeared, the ecosystem of the Commander Islands changed. Algae no longer received constant trimming. The flow of nutrients was disrupted. This affected everything from mollusks to sea otters. One disappearance caused a chain reaction. Sometimes there were reports of encounters with unknown marine animals in Anadyr, the Aleutian Islands, and Kamchatka. But all these observations remained without proof. Pig-footed bandicoot, Cheropus ecaudatus, an almost forgotten creature that disappeared in the shadow of more famous victims of human expansion. This small marsupial mammal from Australia became a symbol of how even the most inconspicuous species can disappear literally within decades. It lived in semi-deserts, savannas, and steppes, preferring dry and hot areas. It had a strange appearance, a short pointed muzzle, long ears, and unusually thin legs, especially the hind ones. Hence the name pig-footed. It looked as if someone had crossed a jerboa, a kangaroo, and a hedgehog. The fur was coarse but without spines. The back was gray-brown, belly white, and the tail long, thin, and black on top. In size, it was slightly larger than a guinea pig, body length up to 26 cm, tail up to 14 cm. During the day, it hid in burrows. At night, it came out to hunt, ate everything from roots and seeds to insects, and it could reproduce with only 2 young per litter and only once a year. It was first described in the 19th century and last seen alive in 1997 near Lake Eyre. However, there were rumors that some individuals might have survived until the 1930s or even 40s in remote areas of Western and South Australia, but no evidence of this ever appeared. The reasons for extinction are the same as for many Australian endemics: livestock grazing, habitat destruction, and introduced predators. Foxes, which Europeans released across the continent for hunting, destroyed millions of small animals. It wasn't a jaw, not a spine, not a fin, but a toothed spiral, so strange that at first it was mistaken